Hello there, kind sir. Tell your friends about heat training. We're going to teach them a little bit today about heat training. No, it does not include spending 90% of your day in your heated bed. They're not going to use your approach. It doesn't work. Don't look at me like that. Why, hello there, endurance nerds. Congratulations on clicking on a video that isn't just a glorified product ad or a dude yelling about electrolytes while shirtless in the desert. If you're here, you've either been betrayed by the sun during a training session or you're one of those rare overachievers who like to sweat with purpose. Maybe you've noticed your FTP mysteriously plummets whenever the weather gets spicy. Or maybe you've been humbled by the kind of long run that transforms your shoes into portable foot steamers and your soul into soup. Either way, welcome. You're about to get smarter, sweatier, and significantly harder to kill. Because today, we're going to dive into how heat training can take you from mildly damp into a thermally superior engine of endurance. Let's begin.
Round 1, fight.
There's a particular type of dread that sets in when you're training in the heat. It's not dramatic or cinematic. There's no lightning crash, no hard rock montage. It's quieter than that. You start to notice that your skin is already slick before you finish the warm-up. Your heart rate spikes despite the effort being laughably low. And then there's that special moment where you glance down at your power or pace data and you realize that you're barely moving, yet somehow you're still dying. Every endurance athlete knows that feeling, but most don't understand what's actually happening when it hits. They'll chalk it up to bad fitness, overtraining, or some vague electrolyte imbalance that they can't really define. But the real culprit is simpler and much more sinister. It's heat stress, and more importantly, your total lack of adaptation to it. Training in the heat is often treated like an unfortunate side effect of the calendar, something to get through, a weather condition to tolerate, rather than a performance variable to actually train for. And it's that misunderstanding that leads to two possible outcomes. First, the athlete either avoids the heat entirely, sheltering indoors like a nocturnal cave dweller, or second, they suffer through it, week after week, praying their body will magically learn how to deal with it, usually just in time for them to explode halfway through their first summer event. But the science is clear. Heat adaptation is a trainable physiological process, and when you treat it like a training stimulus, deliberate, structured, and progressive, it can unlock a level of resilience and performance that you simply do not get in cool weather. In fact, in some cases, heat training provides a similar benefit to something like altitude exposure or threshold conditioning, minus the nosebleeds, ego-crushing lab tests, or the need to explain to TSA why your suitcase is full of rice cakes and Lycra. Now, when the temperature rises, so do the training myths. You'll hear everything from,
if your sweat's just dripping off, it's doing nothing,
to,
Ice slushies before a ride will shut down your system.
some people will say don't pour water over your head or you'll stop sweating and combust like a solar-powered piñata. Others insist that your drink mix needs to match your exact sweat composition or else. With so much bad advice wrapped up in half-truths, it's no wonder people get heat training wrong. This video is not about roasting every myth. It's about understanding what actually works, from pre-ride prep to in-ride strategies and long-term adaptation. We're going to walk through how to train smarter in heat without falling for the noise. So let's break down what makes heat feel so damn difficult and why that difficulty is exactly what makes it so effective. At rest, your body maintains a fairly tight range for internal temperature, typically around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And during exercise, your muscles generate heat, and that core temperature starts to rise. In cool or neutral environments, your body handles this without much drama. Blood flow increases to the skin, sweat production ramps up, and evaporation keeps everything in check. But once the ambient temperature approaches or exceeds your skin temperature, which is usually around 91 degrees Fahrenheit, the game changes. Evaporation becomes your only viable method of cooling. Convection, conduction, and radiation all become negligible or even reverse direction, making you absorb more heat than you actually release. Now layer exercise onto that, and as soon as you start running, cycling, or fill in your sport of choice here, your metabolic rate skyrockets, and your body begins generating 15 to 20 times more heat than it does at rest. The majority of this heat comes from muscle contractions, not just from the movement itself, but from the inefficiencies of energy transfer. Only about 20 to 25% of your energy is turned into mechanical power, an excruciatingly humbling statistic. The other 75 to 80% is heat. Glorious, suffocating heat. The kind that makes you question if your internal organs are hosting a chili cook-off while your skin moonlights as a convection oven, running a special on slow-roasted regret. But to prevent overheating, your body initiates a series of emergency responses. Blood vessels near the skin start to dilate to allow for heat transfer. Your heart starts pumping faster to maintain both muscle and skin perfusion. And this creates a cardiovascular double bind. You're now trying to deliver oxygen to your working muscles and simultaneously shunt blood to your surface to offload that heat. In practical terms, this means you're forced to compromise. Either your skin gets the blood and you stay cooler but lose performance, or your muscles get the blood and you push harder but risk catastrophic overheating. Either way, performance suffers, especially if your idea of heat prep is, I once rode in July and survived. It gets worse. When your sweat rate increases, you start losing fluids at an accelerated rate, often 1 to 2 liters per hour and sometimes more for heavy sweaters. Along with fluid, you lose sodium, potassium, chloride, and magnesium. This doesn't just mess with hydration, it affects nerve conduction, muscle contraction, and even thermal regulation itself. Dehydration decreases blood volume, which further increases cardiovascular strain, creating a feedback loop of physiological misery. All of this adds up to a single brutal truth. When you're not acclimated to heat, your body becomes catastrophically inefficient. You lose more fluid, you perform worse, you fatigue faster, and you feel exponentially worse at every level of effort. Your perceived exertion climbs for a given workload, and eventually your central nervous system downregulates muscle recruitment just to slow you down. This is not mental, this is not about toughness. This is a productive mechanism designed to prevent your core temperature from cooking your organs. And if you ignore that signal, if you keep pushing despite warning signs, you can progress from heat stress into heat exhaustion, and from there into heat stroke. At that point, you're not training anymore. You're essentially telling your healthcare provider to hold your beer. And yet, this system is trainable. In fact, it adapts remarkably fast, faster than most energy systems in endurance sport. You can start seeing meaningful changes in thermal regulation and cardiovascular strain within just 5 to 7 days of structured exposure. And full acclimation typically occurs by day 10 to 14, depending on how often and how severely you challenge your system. That adaptation process includes a number of critical physiological upgrades. First, plasma volume expansion. This is arguably the most important change, and it starts within 3 to 5 days of consistent heat exposure. Your total blood volume increases, which improves stroke volume, lowers heart rate at a given effort, and supports both skin blood flow and muscle oxygenation. It's like giving your cardiovascular system a bigger gas tank. Second, the earlier onset of sweating. An adapted athlete starts sweating sooner in a session, at a lower core temperature, which allows for more efficient evaporative cooling over the entire workout. Your sweat rate also increases, meaning that you produce more sweat per minute, but that sweat becomes more dilute, which means you're losing less sodium, which helps to maintain electrolyte balance and reduces the risk of cramps and hyponatremia. Third is lower core temperature during exertion. Over time, your body just gets better at maintaining a stable internal temperature, even under high heat loads. You're not just suffering less, you're actually functioning better. And fourth is the reduced heart rate for a given workload. This is the one that most athletes are going to notice first. That same zone 2 run or endurance ride that used to spike your heart rate into zone 3 in the heat suddenly becomes manageable again. And when you return to cool weather, well, that efficiency carries over. You're now operating with a more robust cooling system, greater blood volume, and a lower thermal regulatory cost. Translation? Free speed. These adaptations don't just improve heat tolerance, they translate to performance gains across conditions, especially in longer events where cardiac drift and fluid loss start to play tag team with your soul. That's why heat training isn't just for desert weirdos running ultras in Satan's armpit. It's for anybody who wants to become a tougher, more efficient endurance athlete, especially in the summer where every workout feels like you're marinating in your own electrolyte brine. So yes, heat training feels terrible at first. That's the point. It's a signal that your body isn't ready yet. But give it structure, give it time, and that heat stress becomes one of the most potent training tools available. All you have to do is not quit before your body stops sending passive-aggressive death threats. But let's say you're convinced now. You've had enough of heat kicking your ass. You're ready to do more than just survive summer training. You want to use it to get better. Let's check that enthusiasm for a second, because here's where most athletes go wrong. They think heat adaptation is something that just happens eventually. That if they spend enough time drenched in their own sweat, eventually their body will magically figure it out. Spoiler, it doesn't. At least not well. Not consistently, and not in any way that you can bank on come time to put your money where your mouth is. If you want the adaptations that make heat training actually worth the misery, expanded plasma volume, earlier sweat onset, reduced heart rate, lower core temp, all the things, you need to apply heat exposure in the same way that you apply other training stimulus, progressively, repeatedly, and with a plan. So, how do you structure heat training? First, you need to decide how you want to apply the stimulus. And there are a few different ways to do it, each with pros and cons depending on your sport, your climate, time availability, and tolerance for suffering. The most straightforward method is to simply train in heat. Go outside when it's hot, no early morning cheating, no hiding in the shade. If it's 85 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, or for my metric crowd, 29 to 38 C, congratulations, it's time to suffer. In this method, your goal is sustained exposure at low to moderate intensity. This is not where you go do intervals or try to smash a tempo session. This is where you slow things down, embrace the sweat, let your body adjust. Think zone 2 effort, like 60 to 90 minutes being ideal. Long enough for your core temperature to rise and stay elevated, but not so long that you're pushing into heat exhaustion territory. You want to hit this dose 5 to 7 days in a row if possible. That's where the sweet spot is, where adaptations begin to compound. Take too many rest days in between and you lose the continuity. If you absolutely can't do 7 consecutive days, fine. Do what you can, but understand that the timeline will stretch out accordingly. Now, for athletes who live in cooler climates or those who want to train their cardiovascular system without the mechanical load of a full workout, there's method number 2. post-exercise heat exposure. This usually means a sauna or a hot bath after your main session. And yes, this absolutely works. Essentially, you're going to do your normal ride or run, preferably in neutral or warm weather. Then you're going to go sit in a sauna, somewhere between 160 and 190 degrees Fahrenheit for about 15 to 30 minutes. If you're going to use a hot bath, aim for water around 104 degrees and sit in it up to your neck for the same 30-minute window. The goal is to elevate your core temperature and keep it elevated after training while your body is already heat stressed and glycogen depleted. This prolongs the thermal load without adding physical strain to your muscles and joints. Unlike outdoor training, this method is mechanically passive. You're not risking injury, you're not messing up your run form, and you're not adding fatigue to your legs. This makes it ideal for runners who often can't safely reduce mechanical impact while trying to increase their thermal load. It also works great during a taper or when you're nursing a niggle but still want to stimulate adaptation. The third method, a fan favorite for chaotic indoor masochists, is what we'll call the heat chamber hack. This is where you replicate heat stress indoors using whatever resources and bad ideas that you have lying around. Turn off your fans, close the windows, put on extra layers, long sleeves, gloves, maybe even a rain jacket. Set up a space heater if you're feeling brave, and hit the trainer or treadmill. You're going to want to elevate your core temperature to at least 101.3 degrees Fahrenheit and hold it there for a good 30 minutes. The whole session might last 45 to 90 minutes, but the magic's in the sustained suffering. Thermal stress. Your body needs to be hot. Not I'm lightly glowing after Pilates hot, but should I be supervised hot? If you finish your session just a little sweaty and vaguely annoyed, congratulations, you just took a brisk walk in leggings. But if you're halfway through questioning your life choices, your training plan, and whether your smartwatch is staging a silent protest, then you're actually doing it right. But let's talk about the kind of session you delete from Strava so no one asks if you're okay. The crash and burn heat session. The one where you thought you could train through it and ended up crawling home, salt-crusted, and haunted by the sound of your own heartbeat. If you've been there, maybe you want to go down there and hit that like button. Call it a tiny gesture of solidarity among the heat-addled. Because while heat adaptation is one of the fastest, most potent training tools in the endurance athlete arsenal, it also comes with a giant asterisk. Push too far, too fast, and your body will stop adapting and start shutting down. Let's be clear. Heat illness is not just an inconvenience. It's not a bad day. It's a spectrum of escalating physiological failure, and if you don't know the signs, you can blow straight past safe adaptation and land in the ER wondering why your Garmin suddenly stopped recording. It starts with heat stress, the mild manageable end of the spectrum. This is the normal discomfort that you feel during the early stages of heat training. Higher heart rate, excessive sweating, maybe a bit of brain fog, unpleasant but functional, totally normal during acclimation. From there, you move into heat exhaustion. This is where the warning lights start flashing. Symptoms include nausea, dizziness, headaches, weakness, very heavy sweating, rapid pulse, and sometimes chills. You might feel like your legs just won't move, like your effort isn't matching your output. This is your body triaging resources, redirecting blood flow away from the gut, slowing your brain, trying to maintain core function while sacrificing those non-essential symptoms like muscle power and logic. At this stage, you need to stop. Not back off a little, not just get to the next light pole, stop. Sit down, cool your body, hydrate with electrolytes. If you're going to push through this wall, you don't become a badass. You become a heat stroke candidate. Which brings us to the final boss, heat stroke. The oh shit moment of heat training gone wrong. This is where your core temperature exceeds 104 degrees and your body's cooling systems, they fully collapse. Systems include confusion, staggering, lack of sweat despite heat, rapid shallow breathing, flushed skin, and even loss of consciousness. At this point, you're not adapting, you're cooking. Organs begin to shut down, the central nervous system falters, and permanent damage can occur in minutes. And here's the kicker. Heat stroke can absolutely sneak right up on you, especially if you've already been training through chronic heat stress. Athletes with high pain tolerance or strong willpower are actually more at risk because they ignore the warning signs. They frame distress as grit, but this isn't about toughness. It's about thermodynamics. You cannot willpower your way out of boiled blood. So how do you prevent all of this while still getting the benefits of heat training? First, you want to start by monitoring hydration like it's your job. Weigh yourself before and after your sessions. For every pound of body weight loss, replace it with 16 to 24 ounces of fluid. If you're down 2 or 3 pounds after a session and you only drank water, yikes, you've just diluted your blood plasma and flushed out your sodium. Cue the headaches, cramping, and next day fatigue. Learn from that and adjust your fluid volume for the next session. Which brings us to the second point. Hydrate with electrolytes, not just water. Sodium is the primary electrolyte lost in sweat, about 900 to 1400 milligrams per liter depending on your physiology. Unless you're a salt sprinkler disguised as a human, then you're going to need more. But if you're just chugging plain water or your carb mix while sweating buckets, you're setting yourself up for hyponatremia, which can actually mimic heat exhaustion while needing an entirely different treatment, impair muscle contraction, and in extreme cases, become fatal. You're going to want to track your heart rate, perceived exertion, especially during those first few days of heat exposure. You will notice your heart rate spikes for the same pace or power. That's totally normal. But if your heart rate keeps climbing mid-session, even though your effort hasn't changed, or if you feel like you're racing Kona while moving like a mall-walking grandma, that is not adaptation. That's your body filing an HR complaint. Dial it back before it escalates into a full-blown metabolic tantrum. Here's a simple but overlooked cue. Are you sweating? During early heat adaptation, your sweat rate will increase. Your body is trying to dump heat as efficiently as possible. But once sweat stops, especially when you're still hot, that's a huge red flag. Your cooling system has failed. You are now entering crisis mode. Sit your ass down and cool off, fast. Speaking of cooling off, you want to keep a post-session protocol ready. Cool showers, ice towels, shaded areas. Your body continues generating internal heat even after you stop exercising, especially if you pushed a hard session. You want to bring your core temperature down now to support your recovery and prevent that post-exertional heat illness, not after your ego finishes congratulating itself. And no, sitting in the sauna to stack your methods and really lock it in doesn't make you a badass. It makes you a dehydrated cautionary tale. And finally, you absolutely need to respect the timeline. Heat adaptation is in no way instant. It builds over days and weeks. Trying to rush the process with maximal heat exposure right out of the gate, it's like maxing out your deadlift on day one of strength training. It's not brave, it's reckless. You're not skipping the sucky phase, you're just lucky to be skipping the emergency room. If you do this right, if you build gradually, hydrate intentionally, train at appropriate intensities, and watch for red flags, then you gain resilience without flirting with collapse. That's the line you need to walk, applying enough stress to stimulate adaptation without tipping over into system failure. And once you find that balance, that's when the real magic starts. Because the best part about heat adaptation isn't just surviving the heat, it's how you perform in the cooler conditions as well. You're going to notice that your heart rate drops at submaximal efforts. You're going to see less cardiac drift and see better output for the same effort, all thanks to expanded plasma volume and improved efficiency. Your sweat response is going to become more refined, it's going to kick in sooner, but with lower sodium loss, and it's going to help you stay hydrated and cramp-free longer. Your core temperature is going to stay lower for longer, which means that you can push harder before heat starts flipping breakers in your brain. Elevated core temperature is one of the main drivers of fatigue and endurance events. Lower it, and you delay the meltdown. And no, this isn't just for desert dwellers. Cooler core equals less central fatigue, equals more muscle recruitment, equals better performance. Basically, the colder you run on the inside, the hotter you perform on the outside. Science is weird. Deal with it. And then, of course, there's the psychological shift. What once felt oppressive, humid days, sun exposure, long climbs with no shade, now feels tolerable. Not fun, let's not lie to ourselves, but manageable. And that change in perceived exertion is massive, because as any endurance athlete knows, performance is not just about fitness, it's about how hard the work feels. If you can make the same effort feel easier, you just bought yourself a buffer in every single situation. Think of it this way. If your cooling system gets more efficient, your heart doesn't have to work as hard. That frees up more oxygen and blood flow for your working muscles. Your perceived effort and intensity drops and your thermal ceiling rises, which means that you can maintain effort for longer before fatigue sets in, even if it's a 55-degree morning in spring. So even if your race isn't in the tropics, if it's a long day or there's a chance of a late summer temperature spike, or even if you just want to squeeze every ounce of efficiency out of your cardiovascular system, heat training just might be worth your time. So, let's say you've done your 10 to 14 days of acclimation. Your metrics are stabilizing, you feel stronger, great. But let's pump the brakes for a second on the celebratory hot yoga sessions. This is where some athletes go completely off the rails. You know the ones I'm talking about, training in the garage year-round with zero fans, windows sealed like a pressure cooker, wrapped in layers like it's a Patagonia ad because they think the secret to performance is marinating in their own sweat every single day. They basically decided to live in a sauna, and then they wonder why their power numbers look like a dying car battery. Here's the deal. Once heat adaptations consolidate, meaning your plasma volume has increased, your sweat response has dialed in, and your core temperature regulation has kind of hit its stride, continuing to force every session through thermal hell doesn't really do anything new. You're not adapting further. You're just suppressing your performance. Every session becomes artificially harder. Your power and your pace are capped. Recovery takes longer. Intensity suffers. You're just training with the brakes half on, proudly. Heat training is a tool, not a lifestyle. If you use it too often, it loses effectiveness. Or worse, it becomes counterproductive. At that point, you're no longer optimizing your physiology. You're just heat stressing yourself into a chronically suppressed state. Here's where it gets a little tricky. Heat adaptation is a use it or lose it phenomenon. After about 3 to 5 days without heat exposure, some of those adaptations do begin to fade. The first to go, your sweat response. Then plasma volume begins to decline. By about 10 to 14 days of no heat exposure at all, you've lost a significant chunk of your hard-earned heat resilience, especially if your training has moved into cooler environments or lower intensities. But it's absolutely not all or nothing. Some adaptations, like improved blood flow and hormonal changes and aldosterone sensitivity, those linger longer. Think of it like detraining. The longer that you stay away, the more you lose. But the curve isn't immediate. And the good news is that reacclimation is faster. Once your body has learned to adapt to heat, it can usually redeploy those adaptations in about 5 to 7 days instead of starting from scratch. The smart approach isn't constant heat exposure. It's topping off those adaptations with low-dose maintenance, a sauna once or twice a week, a short indoor session with reduced fan use, or heat boosters in race week if you're prepping for something like a hot event. just enough to remind your body of what to do without dragging your fitness down in the process. Now, let's be clear. Heat adaptation doesn't mean that you're immune to heat. It means that you're prepared. So when it's time for a key session, race, or other performance in the heat, the goal isn't to tolerate more suffering. It's to stack smart strategies on top of your adaptations and squeeze every last watt out of your preparation. So here's how to stay cool when it counts. First, pre-cool before your warm-up. Ice towels on the neck or shoulders, fashion-forward ice vests, or an ice slushie about 15 minutes before your warm-up can lower your starting core temperature, and you can delay that performance drop-off. This gives your adaptations a head start instead of making them scramble from the gun. Next, use cold fluids, not lukewarm, during your event. Even if you're limited to what fits in your bottles, stashing them in ice or pre-chilling with frozen hydration mixes helps to reduce internal heat load during the early stages. Even basic insulated bottles can keep fluids cold longer and help you to fake feeling good for an extra 20 minutes. Cold drinks aren't just refreshing, they lower gut temperature and help to delay fatigue. You also need to evaporate smarter. In dry environments, dousing yourself with water mid-race is highly effective. It boosts evaporative cooling and buys you watts. But in humid air, that water just sits there. So if you're soaked and not drying, lean more into drinking those bottles instead. You can also use cooling accessories when they're allowed. Mesh vest stuffed with ice, arm sleeves dunked in ice water, or even a thin cotton sock full of ice down your back can maintain a trickle of cooling for about 20 to 30 minutes. Not always legal in racing, but great in training or aid station supported events. Finally, know when to pull the plug. Heat adaptations give you more rope, not invincibility. If you stop sweating, feel chilled despite the heat, or your heart rate decouples from your effort, that's not grit, it's a cliff edge. Ease up before your race becomes a cautionary tale. Adaptation sets the stage, but strategy closes the deal. Train in the heat, adapt, consolidate, then use those strategies to work for you, not against you. But let's make this practical. Here's your TLDR. Pick your method, whether it's outdoor training, post-exercise sauna or bath, indoor hacks, or a carefully crafted buffet. Train in the heat for 5 to 7 consecutive days. 10 to 14 is better. Keep your intensity low. This is zone 2, not chasing every KOM. Drink fluids with sodium always, not just water or straight carb mixes. Stop if symptoms of heat illness show up, nausea, confusion, lack of sweat, or uncontrolled heart rate. Maintain your adaptations with 1 to 2 heat sessions per week. And most importantly, stop treating heat like an annoying weather app notification. Treat it like altitude. Treat it like a strength block. Treat it like the secret weapon that it actually is. Because if you suffer smart instead of just suffering loud, you'll be ahead of the pack. And when the sun comes out and the field melts and everyone's pacing turns into a public cry for help, you'll still be moving, cool-headed, unbothered, and borderline terrifying. Heat is undefeated, but adaptation, that's how you play defense like a pro. Let everybody else turn into sunburned puddles of regret. You train for this. Use the heat like a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. Precise, brutal, and effective. Build it, bank it, and then back off, because the goal isn't to suffer forever. The goal is to be the last one standing while everyone else is fusing with the asphalt and rethinking their life choices. But you tell me, how do you handle the heat? Got a horror story that left you questioning your sanity, your hydration plan, or why you thought a black kit was a good idea? Drop your sweaty confessions down in the comments down below. And while you're down there, tap on those shiny YouTube buttons. They're free, mildly satisfying, and they're scientifically proven to make your next session feel 2% cooler. Don't fact check that. YouTube science is undisputed. But thank you guys all so much for watching. And as always, I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.